Hello, hello, Internet world, and welcome to another Tiny Desk sermon. This is a chance to look at the readings for this coming Sunday and for me to kind of begin to explore them in sermon preparation. This coming Sunday is the fourth Sunday of Easter, which is always Good Shepherd Sunday. So the gospel reading always comes from John, from the section where Jesus talks about being the Good Shepherd. And over 3 years, we split that up into three different readings. Because it's so common and it's so familiar, it is not where I want to focus my attention for a sermon. I might probably allude to it, but I won't make it my focus. What I am very interested in focusing on is the reading from Revelation, which will give us a lot to talk about. So you might notice that the first reading here is from Acts, and throughout the Easter season, we get first readings from Acts rather than from the Old Testament, which would be the normal first reading. So, Revelation 7. Let me read it. We'll talk a little bit about Revelation and then a little bit about what this text might be saying to us. After this, I looked. Now, I here is John, who is the person who's receiving this revelation or this vision for the whole book. After this, I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hands. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb." And all the angels stood around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, singing, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these robed in white, and where have they come from?" I said to him, "Sir, you are the one that knows." Then he said to me, "These are they who have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason, they are before the throne of God and worship him day and night within his temple, and the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them. They will hunger no more and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." All right, it's we don't get too many readings from Revelation in the lectionary 3-year cycle, but this and the one we get from, I think, Revelation 20 or 21 are just beautiful, powerful images of hope and of expectation of what God is doing and encouragement for the faithful. So the book of Revelation is one of probably the most misunderstood book of the Bible, the most misused book of the Bible. And for that reason, a lot of people don't have much particular interest in it. I find it a fascinating book. I find it a helpful book to think about the life of the church, but it needs to be used and understood appropriately. Let me walk through the text a little bit, and then I'll give a little more background and thoughts on the text. And hello, Barbara Wiederenders. So at the beginning, we get this, "After this I looked, there was a great multitude." Now this comes after just before this is the somewhat well-known text about there being 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. That number, 144,000, some sort of conservative, evangelical, or fundamentalist people would take as a literal thing. So certain traditions assume 144,000 people get saved and everyone else is lost. And good luck with that. It's a complete misunderstanding of that number, which is symbolic. And there's several different ways to interpret that, but it's not literal. But then to follow immediately with this, saying there was a great multitude that no one could count. So it's a vast group of people, countless numbers of people. And it reflects the diversity of all of humanity. Every nation, all tribes, all peoples, all languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they're all there praising God. So this is a vision of the ultimate goal of God gathering in. If you can kind of go at it two ways. One is sort of a universalist way of gathering in all people, or at least that the gathering of the faithful necessarily represents all of humanity. Now, when they cry out and they say, "Salvation belongs to our God," that is a somewhat political statement to make in the midst of the Roman Empire, where salvation was seen as what the emperor brought or the empire brought. So this is a purposely, like much of Revelation and a lot of the New Testament, purposely anti-empire thing to say. Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. And they praise God for power and might and all that. And these words are quite influential in liturgy and hymnody. But who are these who are gathered around, robed in white? Well, the imagery of being robed in white denotes a certain kind of purity image, being washed clean or being pure. But the odd thing about this is, how did they become pure? How did the robes become white? They were washed in the blood of the Lamb. So this is very powerful, evocative imagery that is trying to say something very significant. Now, first of all, obviously, you don't make things white by washing them in blood. If you've ever had a blood stain on clothing, you know how hard it is to get out, and that is no way to get something pure white. So something else is going on here, and that is related to this whole image of the Lamb. So in John's Gospel, which is a different John from John of Patmos, who's the John of Revelation, but in both writings, the image of the Lamb becomes an important one for understanding Christ. And the blood of the Lamb refers to the sacrifice of the Lamb, the giving of life, which is what blood represents, and sacrificial blood of giving up life for something else. So to wash your robes and make them white in the blood of the Lamb is to participate in the sacrificial life of Jesus. And that what makes them white or pure is the sacrificial life of the Lamb. And yet, then there is participation in that life. There's a section before this in Revelation that, I think it's chapter 5, talks about the lion. It's an image of a lion. And at first it sounds like it's maybe alluding to Christ. But that image disappears fairly quickly in Revelation, and is replaced by the Lamb. And I think there's a reason for that. If you think about lion versus lamb, lion is a predator, is a powerful devourer of other creatures, symbol of strength and majesty and other things too. The lamb is a much humbler, more vulnerable image, and an animal used for sacrificial religious rituals. So part of what's going on in Revelation is this criticism of the way the empire works. And the empire works, you might say, by lion power, by a dominant, devouring lion power. And what Jesus embodies is lamb power, which is the power to transform through sacrificial love. That's why the symbol of the lamb is so important. It is not just simply embracing sort of a sacrificial system. It is that Jesus embodied this kind of sacrificial love, and that it is in direct contrast to the power of the empire. So those who make their robes white in the blood of the Lamb are those who are participating in this sacrificial love in the world. And so there's a lot, to ponder for us about how do we, in our setting, participate in the sacrificial love of Christ in and for the world. And then the kind of the permeating issue throughout Revelation is that there's always risk of rejection or persecution or even martyrdom for those who choose to live by lamb power instead of lion power. Now, sometimes when people read the book of Revelation, it sounds like there's this really vast persecution going on of Christians, that it's a big endeavor, that all Christians are being rounded up or thrown in jail or crucified or fed to the lions. That really wasn't the case when the book of Revelation was written. In the late, probably around the year 95, persecutions would happen, but they weren't prevalent. But if you back up about 20 years, was the beginning under Emperor Nero of the intentional persecution of Christians. Now, one of the things you might know about the book of Revelation is its enigmatic use of the number 666, the mark of the beast. And there's all kinds of ways to interpret that, and most of them are bad. But most scholars of the book of Revelation understand that, like everything else in Revelation, 666 is a coded symbol. And if you do a game with letters of the alphabet and their number position, and whatever you do to it, it seems clear to many that 666 is referring to Emperor Nero, the one who kind of began the persecution of the church. So if you're living 20 years later and you're in Asia Minor, which is basically Turkey, which is where the book of Revelation is kind of coming out of, you're living with the memory of that persecution and maybe some fear and anxiety. You yourself might only be facing some much less significant social ostracization or rejection for being Christian, because Christianity was largely misunderstood by the first, second century Roman world. Christians were thought to be cannibals because of the Lord's Supper. There were all kinds of accusations about... They were even called atheists because they didn't believe in all the gods of the Roman Empire. But also they were seen as odd for their way of living, for their living by lamb power instead of lion power. So the book of Revelation, while it has this kind of dramatic persecution syndrome going on, is really speaking to people whose struggle is about more social and personal struggles and persecutions that are tempting people to give up on the Jesus way, to give up on Lamb power as the way to live. And so the book of Revelation is always about encouragement and hope for the faithful. But it isn't only for people who are facing direct risk of martyrdom. The martyrs are lifted up in Revelation as encouragement and empowerment for those who are facing much less rejection or suffering, and to say, yeah, you can do this. You can stay faithful, and you can live in tension with and in rejection of the ways of the empire, and you may pay a price for it, but you're going to come through this. It's going to be okay in the end. That's the ultimate message of Revelation, is it's going to be okay in the end. It's hardly ever presented that way. It's always about the drama and the focus on destruction and all that kind of judgment stuff. But it's a book for the faithful to say it's going to be okay in the end. So therefore, being faithful to who we are as followers of Jesus is a good thing to stick with. And even if you do face persecution or rejection or struggles, it's going to be okay. So that's how I see this passage, and how it might speak to us today is to ponder the struggles we are facing right now. The kind of, there can be kind of a burnout among people who care about God's love being enacted in the world, who care about justice being enacted in the world, and healing and reconciliation. There can be a burnout in living that out, because it seems like we've been trying for so long, so hard, and the struggle isn't over. And the book of Revelation says the struggle isn't over, but it's going to be okay. And our calling is to stay in the struggle. And to stay in the struggle, whether for some of us it means we're going to pay the ultimate price for that struggle, and for most of us it means we're going to pay some kind of price for that struggle. Probably not the ultimate price. But we are in good company with the martyrs and the saints who have paid the price. And we are in good company because we know Jesus to be the Lamb who is the one God uses to bring about the goal of the universe. And that's why finally, at the end of this, and for Good Shepherd Sunday, we hear, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. The only one who could shepherd the people who are facing the struggle of being God's people in the world is the one who has already lived that struggle and has come through it as the resurrected one. So that's why the Lamb becomes the shepherd. And think about how odd an image that is, a lamb becoming a shepherd. It's not usually how we talk about it. So the only one that we want to call our shepherd, our guide, our source of security, our one to follow, is the one who is the Lamb, whose blood has made our robes white, who have brought us into a true understanding of God through sacrificial love, and has empowered us to be sacrificial love in the world. Yeah, any comments or questions out there? I think a couple of you were watching in the live version of this. I'm going to make a few comments while I wait to see if there are any comments or questions. I'm going to be taking a online class the next 2 weeks on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and so I will not be free to do Tiny Desk Sermon for the next 2 Wednesdays, but I will be back after that. Let's see, what do we have going on else? We have Vicar Wes's ongoing class on the ELCA social statements, and information about that is in the email that just went out today, and also on our website. This Sunday we have worship at 10, hospitality after. I am also pondering some form of a summer adult study to do either on Zoom or on YouTube Live or something. And I'm still kind of discerning what I'm going to do, but I hope to have that information out in the next week or two. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments, so that's probably where I need to end. Thank you for joining me and for contemplating what it means to be people who live with Lamb power. Okay, so I do see a comment now. I'm going to respond to it. What is the reference to 666 in Revelation? I mentioned this earlier, Lois, so I don't know if you missed it. But the reference 666 seems to be a coded way of referring to Nero the emperor. Nero was the first emperor to really actively persecute Christians. And so 666 is a reference to the emperor. And then the mark of the beast then is those who are willing to buy into the ways of the empire rather than the ways of Christ. It's symbolic. It's turned into something very strange in our culture due to the premillennial dispensationalist view of that, which I won't go into right now, but I taught a class on it. So it can be both literally Nero, it can symbolically be the power of the empire. 666 is in Revelation. I'm forgetting which chapter it's in right now. Barbara says it's hard to see my own sacrificial love in action. If I'm not sacrificing, am I being faithful? So what does sacrificial love mean? It means any way that we give of ourselves and of our life to love others, to help others. So sacrificial love means giving some of our money to help people who are vulnerable and in need. It means taking care of those among us who are sick or vulnerable. It means, speaking out and working on behalf of people who are facing rejection and oppression in our society. So sacrificial love is, I think, what we mean when we say we are called to love others. It's just recognizing that always involves some cost. It can be very small. It can be very significant. So how are we inspired to accept that the cost is worth it? So there we go. Okay, thank you for joining me, and I'll be back in 3 weeks with the next Tiny Desk sermon. But I hope to see you Sunday online or in person for worship. Thank you for joining me.